matagal nang sinabi ni Presidente Duterte na hindi siya haharap sa mga dayuhang mga mahistrado at kung merong gustong magkaso sa kanya, dito po sa Pilipinas dapat isa pa ang kaso. No? So wala po kaming reaksyon. Kung gusto nila magsayang ng oras at ng pera, ay decision po nila yan. No? Pero hindi po haharap doon sa hukuman si Presidente Duterte. Nag-aaksaya lang sila ng panahon, nag-aaksaya lang sila ng pera.
From the nation's capital, all sides, all the time, I'm Robbie Alampay.
And I'm Gretchen Ho. The big story tonight.
We begin tonight with the International Criminal Court ordering the resumption of the probe into former President Rodrigo Duterte's bloody war on drugs.
But just as it did before, the Philippines is eyeing to appeal the inquiry. Here's what we know. It all started in 2018 when former ICC prosecutor Fatou Bensouda opened the preliminary probe into the drug war, noting that there is reasonable basis to believe that the crimes against humanity of murder have been committed. In 2019, President Duterte officially withdrew the Philippines from the ICC. But by May 2021, Bensouda argued that under the ICC statute, it still has jurisdiction for crimes committed between 2016 and 2019. Now, after her initial investigation, Bensouda requested a formal ICC probe ahead of her retirement. In September 2021, the ICC greenlights the probe into the drug war, but the investigation was suspended 2 months later over the Philippines' deferral request. The Philippine government argued that the ICC lacked the jurisdiction to conduct the probe, claiming that it has already done or is already doing its own investigation and has prosecuted alleged crimes. In June last year, current ICC prosecutor Karim Khan urges the International Tribunal to resume the probe. But by this time, Duterte's term had ended and he was replaced by President Bongbong Marcos. Marcos, however, noted in August 2022 that the Philippines has no intention of rejoining the ICC. Now, this brings us to earlier today, when the ICC orders the resumption of the probe into the war on drugs. Now, in a statement, the ICC says the pre-trial chamber is not convinced that the Philippine government is undertaking its own investigation into the drug war, which would warrant a deferral of the International Court's probe.
The pre-trial chamber also concluded that local initiatives and proceedings do not amount to concrete and progressive steps that mirror the court's investigation. The ICC chamber also pointed out that the Philippine government did not contest its prosecution's suggestion that it failed to inquire into any criminality pattern or systematic nature of crimes in the killings. Former President Duterte has shrugged off the decision. Attorney Harry Roque, Duterte's former spokesperson, said Duterte has reiterated his position that he will not appear before any foreign court. Roque noted that Duterte will only submit to prosecution and judgment of local courts. Roque also questioned the efficiency of the ICC's investigation.
Hahamunin ko nga ICC, patunayan nga mas mabilis ang proseso ninyo. Itong investigation nito, kailan pa rin sinimulan hanggang ngayon, investigation pa rin. Samantalang ang mga piskal, 90 days lang ang binibigay sa kanila para maresolba ang lahat ng mga preliminary investigation na nakabinbin sa kanila. So sino mas mabagal? Di ba? Di hamak na mas mababal ang ICC.
Now, here to join us for a discussion into the ICC's decision, we have with us Carlos Conde, senior researcher from the Human Rights Watch. Good evening. Welcome to The Big Story.
Hi, good evening, Gretchen. Good evening, Robbie. Thank you for having me.
All right, Sir Caloy, what do you think about this development with the government refusing to acknowledge, to recognize this decision by the ICC? Do you think that this development will change anything about where we are right now when it comes to probing the drug war?
Well, yeah, that's a pretty saddening position by the Philippine government because that goes against every rhetoric that the Marcos government has said about, is upholding human rights and all of that. So the impact of this, I would say, non-cooperation would be, I think, quite huge because the ICC operates on cooperation and assistance of member states or even non-member states, non-member states the Rome Statute that created ICC. So any investigation from here on out can proceed only, not only, but can proceed smoothly if the government cooperates. But they're saying that they're not going to cooperate, so that's going to be a problem, we think, as we move forward.
Yeah, but Kaloy, I note your qualifier there. It will not proceed smoothly, and you added that, no? But how can it proceed? Kahit hindi smooth, what options on the side of the ICC do they have to push forward with an investigation, notwithstanding non-cooperation from the Philippine government? Do they actually have options outside of being allowed to enter the country?
That's the tricky part, Robbie, because during the preliminary examination stage, the ICC managed to get help from a lot of NGOs, civil society activists, and human rights defender groups, right? So they were able to gather a lot of evidence, a lot of information from victims of the alleged crimes against humanity that's lodged against Duterte and the Philippine government. The problem with the investigation phase is that, as I pointed out, cooperation and assistance by states is important. So keep in mind that the ICC does not have a police force. It does not have a police power. So it cannot it cannot enter or obtain evidence in sovereign countries without the country's permission. So that is really a problem. Now, does that mean that the ICC is totally helpless? Hindi naman. I'm sure the ICC have ways of navigating this terrain. My guess is that they will probably continue cooperating with civil society organizations. But as I said, it's going to be tough without the country's cooperation.
Can they navigate this terrain, for example, from a distance? Can they do it online? Can they gather testimonial evidence? Can they interview witnesses, survivors, victims, basically over Zoom?
Well, theoretically, they can, because in the investigation stage of the whole process, this is where they will get a lot of information from all sorts of sources. They can collect evidence sent, I suppose, via online. They can interview witnesses online if they have to. They can consult with experts online. But at the end of the day, the accused in this case, the Philippine government or Mr. Duterte and his lieutenants can always, I suppose, claim that they were not given a fair shake because they were not. The ICC team, for instance, was not able to come to the Philippines. So it's going to be tough, to put it simply.
Is it, then safe to say or all right to presume that for the next 6 years, there will be no solid summons or arrests that are going to happen from the ICC side or that part of the development of the case? And with Secretary Boying Remulla saying that this is an insult to the Philippine judicial system, what does this say now about protecting human rights in the country?
Well, setting aside that self-serving statement from DOJ Secretary Remulla, really at this point, it's the Philippine government can, the ICC would really have a really difficult time. I mean, they cannot proceed to the next stage of the investigation, which is to issue arrest and summons without help from countries. They cannot issue. I mean, there are two things that they can do. They can issue arrest warrants if summons do not suffice. If summons are denied. But that's a very, very tough thing to enforce because, again, they don't have a police force and then they don't have cooperation from the country. So really, and keep in mind as well that wala pang actually official charge at this point because the next stage of the investigation, after the investigation, there will be arrests and warrants or summons. And the next step after that is the confirmation of charges. This is the time when people are identified. Who are going to be the accused? Is it going to be Duterte? Is it going to be Bato de la Rosa? We don't know yet. But this is going to take a long, long time. I mean, probably this will outlive the Marcos administration.
Yeah, speaking of the Marcos administration, Kaloy, let's go beyond the ICC and all the considerations of President Marcos. We know he's very conscious of his image, or let's say the Philippines' image in the international scene. He is trying to repair relations. He's trying to repair the image of the country, or for that matter, of the Marcos name in the international community. What are the other factors that bear upon him right now, and what are the other factors that the international community might put to bear upon the considerations of this government, even for the optics of whether or not they're cooperating on these things?
Well, if we base this on the rhetoric coming from the Marcos administration, I mean, they all say that they're going to uphold human rights, but at the same time, they've said time and time again that they're not going to cooperate with the ICC, and in fact, they pretty much shoot down the idea of the Philippines rejoining the Rome Statute, right? So, really, I mean, the international community can bear down on the Marcos administration in a lot of ways. There's pressure, obviously, the diplomatic pressure to be applied by European countries in the EU. Unfortunately, the U.S. is not a member of the ICC, so it doesn't have the moral authority right now to pressure the Philippine government to cooperate with the ICC. So now a lot of this actually is on the shoulder of European states to try to pressure the Marcos administration. Now, keeping in mind that the Marcos administration, as you put it, is very keenly aware of its image, that might work. But if you factor in the local politics, the fact that Mr. Marcos is going to run again for president in 2028, presumably against, Sara Duterte to run again as president in 2028, presumably against another Marcos, that might complicate the situation. So I think that my point here is that local political dynamic is going to play a big part in how this case is going to move forward.
Okay, Kaloy, maraming salamat. Human Rights Watch senior researcher Carlos Conde. The Philippine Army has taken custody of former Presidential Security Group Chief Jesus Durante after he was tagged as the mastermind in the killing of Davao businesswoman Yvonne Plaza. Durante was also relieved from his command of the 1001st Brigade, and he's now facing a murder complaint along with 6 other soldiers supposedly involved in the crime. The Army says at least 4 of the other accused soldiers are now under their custody, while the 2 others are still being located. Army Commander Romeo Bronner says they are also conducting their own investigation into the incident. Results of their investigation will determine whether Durante and the other soldiers would face a general court-martial.
After the break, we will speak with the Coast Guard's Maritime Security Advisor, Commodore Jay Tariella, on President Marcos's call for them to defend not only the country's coastlines, but also its citizens. That when the big story returns. Keep it here on One News.
Somos todos hijos de Dios. Y Dios nos quiere como estamos y con la fuerza que luchamos cada uno por nuestra dignidad. El ser homosexual no es un delito. No es un delito. Sí, pero es pecado. Bueno, primero, distingamos pecado por delito. Pero también es pecado la falta de caridad con el prójimo. ¿Y vos cómo andás? Son 2 cosas. Armar libre. Cada hombre y cada mujer tiene que tener una ventana en su vida donde pueda volcar su esperanza y donde pueda ver la dignidad de Dios. Y ser homosexual no es un delito, es una condición humana.
Can we brew better beer in the era of climate change? Carlsberg Group thinks it can. The company has filed at least a dozen international barley patent applications and invested millions of dollars into research and unveiled an experimental recipe. What makes it distinctive is its variety of barley, which is engineered to thrive under high heat and water stress. In other words, it's a cool beer for a warm planet. For the $600 billion global brewing industry, such advances can't happen fast enough. Rising temperatures are pummeling it from all sides. Barley yields are falling, fresh water is lacking, and good quality hops, that's the flower that packs a bitter bite, those are at risk of being scorched by heat waves. Carlsberg makes about 14 billion liters of beer across its 140 brands each year. And it gets a lot of its barley from areas where droughts have become more frequent. While the Danish company's response to such pressures is atypical, it has yielded some breakthroughs, such as publishing the Barley Genome, which is twice the size of a human's, or developing a technique to rapidly identify genetic traits that make a crop tolerant to high heat or drought. They're notable, but there are limitations. Carlsberg admits that of the 15,000 barley lines produced annually, fewer than 5 make it to market. And there are questions about whether it's research.
You're watching the big story here on One News.
In other news, President Bongbong Marcos gave a strong reminder to the Philippine Coast Guard amid reports of incursions and territorial disputes in the West Philippine Sea. During the oath-taking of PCG personnel in Malacanang yesterday, the President said that Coast Guard members must always be ready while guarding the country's boundaries. The President said that although the PCG's primary role is search and rescue and border patrol, many duties that once belonged to the Navy have been shifted to the Coast Guard. President Marcos said government will continue to upgrade the PCG's capabilities and facilities. He noted that it is critical for the safety of the nation. Now, here to give us his insights on President Marcos' reminders to the Coast Guard, we have with us live via Zoom PCG Maritime Security Advisor Commodore Jay Tariella. Good evening. Welcome to the big story, Commodore.
Good evening, Mr. Ruby and Ms. Gretchen.
Sir, malinaw naman po ang reminders ng Pangulo. But I guess the question always is, do you have everything you need?
Yes, sir. First of all, I would like to highlight that the Philippine Coast Guard, under the leadership of her Commandant, Admiral Artemio Abu, has always been supported on whatever the directive of our Commander-in-Chief, President Bongbong Marcos. Right now, the Philippine Coast Guard has been tasked by the President for constant deployment of PCG vessels in the West Philippine Sea, and for us also to increase our frequency of maritime patrols. He also added that we should increase our personnel assigned at the Kalayaan Island Group. Though we have very limited number of vessels and aircraft, we need to be strategic to maximize the deployment of our assets in the West Philippine Sea. At present, we only have 3 offshore patrol vessels and 10 44-meter MRVs that we use. But these may not be enough to cover the vast area of the West Philippine Sea. But I am certain that your Philippine Coast Guard remains to have the commitment that we will continuously hold our ground to assert our sovereign rights in our exclusive economic zone.
Sir, malinaw naman po yung commitment and everybody respects that. As you said nga, we're trying to do everything that we can given our limited resources. But nonetheless, give us an idea. You gave us an idea of where we actually stand right now in terms of our actual vessels. But ideally, in our modernization plans, ano po ba, what's the ask? What's the ideal number where we should be?
Ako, sir, I would argue that the Philippine Coast Guard modernization has been ongoing since 2013. During the time of President Aquino, wherein it was during that particular year that we have already started acquiring vessels from Japan and France. And at present, these are the vessels that we have been deploying in the West Philippine Sea since then. And also to discuss, to be fair with our former president, President Durante, it is also fair for him to say that he has been supportive for the massive increase of the Philippine Coast Guard personnel annually. Before, we are only 8,930, and then he, in his government, he has approved the maximum ceiling of the Philippine Coast Guard to reach 37,869. It is also important to mention that during President Duterte's administration, we were able to acquire 2 Airbus helicopters and 1 Cessna Caravan. Now, to speak for the current administration, we are in constant coordination with the Department of Transportation under the watch of Secretary Jaime Bautista. For a start, I think what is better for the Philippine Coast Guard to at least have a right programming and planning of our acquisition the next coming years is that we are currently reaching out to the members of the House of Representatives and to our Senate to support the passage of the Philippine Coast Guard Modernization Law. We believe that the passage of this law will allow us to have a much more better planning and programming vis-a-vis the funds to be released for the Philippine Coast Guard. But on a side note, also to give you a bird's eye view of where we are right now, the current president remains to be supporting our recruitment of additional personnel. As a matter of fact, for this year, we're expected to recruit additional 4,000. And then in our general appropriations for this fiscal year, he has approved the acquisition of some assets that will support the operational readiness of the Philippine Coast Guard.
Wait, Commodore, can you give us an insight into what the President said when he said that many of the duties of the Navy have now transferred to the Coast Guard? Ano po ba yung sitwasyon on ground? And does that mean now that if you're going to take on more of the roles of the Navy, that you're going to be ready for armed battle?
Ms. Gretchen, I would like to first clarify before I directly answer your question. One of the main reasons why the Philippine Coast Guard took the front seat in the West Philippine Sea strategy is that because this was an effect of what had happened in 2012 during the Scarborough Shoal standoff. We learned that it is not wise for the national government to deploy gray ships in the South China Sea, especially in the contested waters, because it might provoke other claimant states and we can also heighten the tension. As you may be aware, in 2012, we had a standoff because of the deployment of the Philippine Navy. So from 2012, during the time President Aquino until now, under the administration of President Bongbong Marcos, this has been our consistent strategy. The deployment of the Philippine Coast Guard vessels, these are not military vessels. These are white ships. The main objective of this is not to provoke other claimant states. So to answer your other question, whether we are going to replace the Navy in defending our territory is not somewhat very in align with our current mandate. For the Philippine Coast Guard, we are just the instrument of the state so that we cannot provoke other claimant states. But in times of defending our territory wherein there will be an armed conflict, I still believe that the Philippines still need a very strong Navy and a credible Navy. And that is something that the Philippine Coast Guard will not take away from our Philippine Navy.
All right, maraming salamat po, Commodore. PCG Maritime Security Advisor Commodore Jay Tariella. Families of the missing plane passengers in Isabella are calling on authorities to fast-track the search for their loved ones. Jenny Dongon with the report.
From the mountains of the Sierra Madre in Isabella down to the coastal areas, this is how wide the search and rescue window is to try and locate the missing single-engine 206 aircraft, which had 6 people on board. But after 3 days of searching, authorities have found nothing. Rescue teams said they are now focusing their search on a smaller area. This is after a farmer from Divilacan, a nearby town in Macunacon, claimed to have seen a distressed plane heading towards the mountainous part of Barangay Dicaruyan. As for the Philippine Air Force, they had to suspend the aerial search on Friday due to bad weather. Families of the missing passengers, however, are getting impatient.
Kung lagi po yung weather na lang po lagi ang inaano, lalo po silang tumatagal doon. Ang hirap po kasi mag-isip, ang hirap pong maghintay. Malaki po yung possibility masave pa sila. Ang hinihingi lang po namin sana madagdagan pa yung mga taong naghahanap sa kanila doon.
In response, Isabella's incident management team defended the ongoing rescue efforts.
Well, akala siguro nila patag yan na madali mong galugarin. Hindi nila alam na bulubundukin yan, matataas na bundok, magkakatabi, magkamali ka lang pwede kayong sumemplang doon.
Meanwhile, some locals in Divalacan and Makunakon have also joined the search for the missing plane. For News 5, Jenny Dongon, We Are One News.
More Filipinos are said to be becoming more dependent on lending apps for their financial needs. But be warned of what you may be getting yourself into. The National Privacy Commission has come up with a set of guidelines to help consumers identify illegal practices among online lenders. Mobile journalist Yeda Pascual with this report.
Money is as easy as 1, 2, 3. This is what digital lending applications offer to Pinoys who are in immediate need for cash. Compared to traditional banks, lending apps often involve simpler requirements. All you need is a smartphone and internet access, and you can start processing your online loan application. With the push of a button, you can just upload documents and files instead of submitting them personally. But the question is, are these platforms safe to use? One downside is, unlike banks, some online lenders resort to unconventional means to retrieve the money they lend.
Ang dumalabas na collateral para makasingil sila ay yung reputasyon ng tao. Pagka hindi raw sila nakapagbayad, ina-access yung phone book nila, tapos pinapahiya sila sa kanilang mga phone book contacts. So yun yung karamihan na allegation na kukuha natin.
That's why the National Privacy Commission has released a set of guidelines to help the public avoid intimidation and harassment from online lenders. The amended guidelines prohibit lenders from processing borrowers' personal mobile phone information, including access to their contacts. Under the Data Privacy Act of 2012, unauthorized online lenders could face up to 6 years imprisonment and fines of up to 4 million pesos.
Besides on, last year, nilabas ng NPC ang Circular on Administrative Fine. So iba pa po ito sa criminal penalties. Yung administrative fine as high as 5 million. So may fine ka na 5 million, pwede pang mag-proceed sa criminal prosecution na may penalty ng 4 million and 6 years imprisonment.
Despite the sanctions imposed, the NPC reminds consumers to always conduct background checks before trusting loan companies.
Una, advice natin na basahin natin yung mga privacy notices nitong mga kumpanyang to. Pangalawa, check-in din natin kung rehistrado itong mga to sa SEC, sa kanilang website. No? Madali naman siyang makita. Nasa atin din yan kung paano natin poprotektahan yung personal information.
Oh, and to avoid complications in your loans, also make sure that you pay what you owe. Mobile journalist Yeda Pascual. We are One News.
More stories after the break. Keep it here on One News.
Performed to a live audience for the first time in years. Her gig in Dubai was at the opening of one of the city's most architecturally striking hotels. She opened Atlantis The Royal for a reported $24 million as fireworks lit up the sky above Dubai's artificial island. The hotel has nearly 800 rooms and will open to paying customers from February 10. It has 17 bars and restaurants, 90 pools, gyms, spas, and many other amenities to bring in wealthy vacationers. Its owners are targeting a daily rate that ranges from $1,000 a night to $100,000 for the most luxurious suite. Dubai's first Atlantis opened by Kylie Minogue, and the party in November 2008 was followed 2 months later by a property crash and debt crisis that nearly pushed Dubai into bankruptcy. Now, Kresner International's second property is opening, with some wondering if this is a top for Dubai's property market. Analysts disagree. They say Dubai emerged from the pandemic with one of the world's biggest luxury housing booms. It was helped by an influx of newcomers, from Russians looking to protect their wealth to crypto-millionaires and bankers fleeing strict lockdowns in Asia. Also, authorities enacted measures to ensure there isn't a repeat of the speculative era that caused the property market to go bust in 2008. Government-related firms have restructured billions of dollars of debt. Also, proceeds from IPOs of state firms may give the city a cushion to help it ride out hard times. Last year, Dubai introduced a raft of reforms to ease social restrictions and liberalize visa laws. The aim is to attract and retain an expat population that's essential to its economy.
Here on One News.
The remains of slain OFW Jollibee Ranara is set to be repatriated from Kuwait later this evening. The Foreign Affairs Department has been coordinating with Kuwaiti authorities and the employer of Ranara regarding repatriation. The DFA has hired a lawyer to handle the case and pursue prosecution for the crime. The Ranara family, meanwhile, has requested for an autopsy as soon as the remains of Jollibee arrives in the country. The slain OFW's burned body was found over the weekend in the desert in Kuwait. The suspect of her murder is already in the custody of Kuwaiti authorities.
Before we go, here's one more thing to be thankful for this Friday. Now, remember the movie Armageddon with Bruce Willis? Well, we had a close call with an asteroid like that today. Though it wasn't the humanity-ending size type of asteroid, a truck-sized one passed really close to the Earth this morning, Manila time. The asteroid zoomed past the Earth just 2,200 miles above the southern tip of South America. NASA scientists had already said that this asteroid has no chance of hitting Earth. But this is the closest a space rock this size flew by the Earth. Now, even if it came closer, NASA says the asteroid would burn up in the atmosphere and break up before hitting the ground. According to experts, the asteroid is once again on its way around the sun. Well, we live to fight another day.
Swerte.
Salamat
yes,
naman.
Diba?
Weekend
Salamat
na.
naman. So we'll have a good weekend. And that's the big story tonight. For more updates, follow News 5, the Philippine Star, and Business World Online. You may also log on to onenews.ph for more analysis. Ako po si Robbie Alampay.
The Big Star is also available via Signal Play app. Make your free account now at signalplay.com and stream One News anytime, anywhere. Ako po si Gretchen Ho. Stay safe, Philippines.
We are One News, all sides, all the time.